Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody. Bill, another example of how this wildly popular show is taking off. A couple days ago, I'm in D.C. I'm coming back from lunch with my colleague Jamie Weinstein, and someone on the street says, "Hey, are you Matt Lewis?" And I say, "Why, yes, I am." He looks pretty professional and non-threatening. And he says, "I'm a huge fan of blogging heads." And I said, do you listen to my podcast? He said, "No, haven't gotten to that yet, but big blogging heads fan." And it's interesting. I have to say that of all the different things I do, and let's be honest, in terms of the amount of time and energy that goes into this show, kind of a fraction of my work week, I would say that this show is overperforming in terms of the impact it has. And I think that clearly a lot of people and smart intellectual types are paying attention to us. So
and how many of these people say it's all because of Bill Scher? I mean, how much of that do you get? I don't hear that as much in my neck of the woods.
I think you did come up. You do come up, and I. You do come up.
Am I the Alan Combs of this relationship? I need to know. Am I not pulling my own weight here?
Well, that's a little worrying because that would mean I'm the Sean Hannity of this relationship, and I'm not sure that's a compliment right now either. So let's just say we're both popular, and I always talk about you. I talk about how nice you are and how we actually IRL in real life like each other, and it's not just this isn't like we could do this like who was the band that did Mrs. Robert? Simon and Garfunkel, where I just record my part and send it to you. We can never be in the same room. Well, actually, I guess we never are in the same room, so maybe it's sort of that way.
It's happened.
Anyway, if you're watching this show or listening to the podcast, you're part of, I would say, a movement, really. The Alice's Restaurant Massacre movement. And all you have to do is to walk into a major TV network and demand that they carry this show. So anyway.
You just do the feed. You don't even have to have a studio. We just do it as is. You just pump it right into CNN.
There you go. Come on. This is a compelling shit we're doing here. This is good stuff. Anyway, speaking of good stuff, Bill, you're writing up a storm. And the other week you didn't have anything to plug. I know you got at least 2 columns on the bubble right now, right?
Well, I have one in the queue. It should pop later today. So maybe by the time this is uploaded, it'll be up. There's been a lot of hubbub about Hillary Clinton and the basket of deplorables comment, and I think by and large it's being treated as a gaffe. But I argue in the piece, well, at minimum, let's set aside whether it is or is not good for her. At minimum, she is the first Democratic presidential nominee to not give as much as a wink towards white racial grievance. Ever since the Civil Rights Act was passed, George Wallace took 5 states in the Deep South, then Nixon, got the entire South as well as the rest of the country in '72. Democrats have been chasing the white working class vote and have, to varying degrees, gone easy on the racism that is present in that community. And you can go back to George McGovern. There was an ad that George McGovern did where he's on a factory floor and guy's talking to McGovern, basically saying, what's with all these people, getting welfare and aren't doing any work. And McGovern tries to spin it and say, we're going to give jobs to everybody. We're gonna have guaranteed jobs. So big FDR public works message. But then he says, and if they're not willing to work, they shouldn't get a dime. So it's also ed welfare as we know it. And of course that.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily a racial thing to say.
Well, but my point is, he is not confronting. I mean, there's basically a tacit acceptance that whatever racial animus exists in the white working class community, that it's bundled up in economic anxiety, and you should acknowledge the economic anxiety and not confront the racism. Jimmy Carter. This is a story I wasn't aware of. I was just doing some research for the piece, and I caught it. So you remember, of course, the Jeremiah Wright story with Obama, and you remember that. This came back to the white grievance thing. In that More Perfect Union speech, he acknowledges white resentments by name and then justifies it, or at least sympathizes with it, on the grounds of their economic plight. So even Obama did that. And in that speech, you remember, of course, he can't disown Jeremiah Wright. He can no more disown him than his white grandmother. He's expressing sympathy for all of this, simmering hatred based on other circumstance. Jimmy Carter, 2 days before Election Day, 4 African Americans try to attend the church that Jimmy Carter attends in Plains, Georgia. And they're barred from entering the church because it's a rule. It is a documented rule that African Americans are not allowed to attend the church. And the deacons prevent him from entering. The minister is actually a young minister who's trying to change the rule. So the ministers and the deacons are fighting in the precipice. The minister says the rule explicitly uses the N-word to ban their entry. The clerk of the church, who is Jimmy Carter. This
is Jimmy Carter's home church,
yes,
or a church he was attending?
His home church. Well,
wow.
It's both.
But one is an example of bad staff work. The other is an example of maybe a little bit deeper problem that he would continue to go to that.
This is a church that he attends. And his cousin is the clerk. The cousin says, no, the rule doesn't use the N-word. It says Negroes, as if that's somehow better. So Carter's woken up in the middle of the night, Sunday night. He gives a statement on Monday, and the statement is, I can no more resign from the human race over the racial discrimination than I can resign from my church.
Wait a second. Are you saying he used the same? Are you paraphrasing, or it sounds like Obama and the Reverend Wright speech used almost identical language?
I'm going to give you the exact quote. Okay, just give me one second. I'll give you the exact quote. I can't resign from the human race because there's discrimination. I can't resign as an American citizen because there's still discrimination, and I don't intend to resign from my own church because there's discrimination. Now, if it was a country club, I would quit. But this is not my church. It's God's church. I read that. I was like, I think Obama read Carter's statement in crafting.
It's curious, isn't it? It's curious, right?
Right.
That's interesting. If Deval Patrick had given that speech, it would be very obvious that he lifted it. But wow.
So
Jimmy Carter.
So it says on a Monday at a press conference. Actually, I left this part out of the article.
A deep cut, or that's an obscure. That's fascinating.
This is the day.
That's why we go to you for
the election.
This is why we read. This is why we read you. This is why we tolerate the Alan Colmes on the show here.
So anyway, I left this part out of the story because it was getting too long. But so that day, the campaign gets Coretta Scott King to come to the press conference and back Carter up. And she still endorses Carter, but then she tells the press when asked, well, if he can't get the rule changed, you should resign, because Carter was still saying he wanted to change the rule. He was going to work towards it. And
now, was she allowed in the church, or was this press conference held somewhere else?
The conference was in California.
Okay.
So he does this because he's basically not. And there was an earlier incident in the campaign where he says he believes that communities should be allowed to maintain their ethnic purity, quote, ethnic purity, without government intervention, without government. He was saying there shouldn't be discrimination. If someone wants to move there, they should be able to move there, but the government should enforce it. The government should encourage At one point, he even says the word "black intrusion" into white neighborhoods. And then one of his main black supporters, Andrew Young, said that's a terrible blunder. This is Hitlerian language. And then Carter walks back the ethnic purity phrase, but not the policy. He still says government should not forcibly integrate these communities. So he was walking that line in his campaign.
Now, some of it may just be I just don't know the history of this, but you were surprised by this too. I just wrote this morning. I don't want to change the subject, but I just wrote this morning about media bias. I
do want to delve into that separately.
No, I don't want to change the subject. I just want to say that why don't we know about this Jimmy Carter history? Like, is it? I mean, this is a big thing, and it's problematic.
I mean, I feel like I've seen Jimmy Carter documentaries that sort of generally reference that he had some struggles with race in pivoting from being a Georgia politician to a national politician, but I don't see those specific stories get relitigated. I mean, I would imagine I don't think it's a media question. It's who has the interest in relitigating these stories. The left doesn't want to do it, and the right doesn't want to do it, so it gets forgotten into the annals of history.
No! I think the right. Are you telling me that the people who bring up Robert C. Byrd as a Klan member wouldn't be interested in knowing? I mean, especially a few years ago when you could have said Jimmy Carter was the last Democratic president,
Right.
I feel like we would have been interested in knowing that and exploiting that.
I mean, my guess is that the right is so committed to Jimmy Carter as like the worst liberal imaginable that there's not the desire to complicate that narrative, and you have Robert Byrd there as a former KKK guy, and so people on the right lean on that. But the one thing we remember Sister Souljah, right? I mean, Bill Clinton's Sister Souljah. I mean, that was a very high-profile attempt by a Democratic nominee to, throw an elbow to the civil rights community, throw an elbow to Jesse Jackson, and send a signal to the white community, hey, I'm not like these other Democrats. I mean, because, Carter managed to win back...
What did he call her out for, though?
So this was after the Rodney King verdict and the subsequent riots, which killed dozens of people. And then she was interviewed and asked, was it wise for blacks to riot? And she says, yes, it was wise. I'm sorry, I want to get this quote right too, because this gets litigated a lot also. So I have to make sure I get this correct. I mean, if black people... I'm
glad one of us has quotes and facts at hand.
If black people kill black people every day, why don't I have a week and kill white people? Now...
Okay, right. So let me just say this, Bill. I think... So first of all, obviously that's egregious. Secondly, I think, far be it for me to defend Bill Clinton. Thirdly, I think it's very likely that his motives were to, some degree to play the race card. Having said that, clearly what she said was egregious, and I don't know that calling her out for that automatically qualifies as sort of an attempt to rile up white resentment.
Well,
do you get what I'm saying?
Well, it's how it was done. I mean, she was a panelist at the Rainbow Coalition conference the day before Clinton was scheduled to speak there. And Jesse Jackson, Ross Perot is already leading the polls, or closely in the polls at this point. This was mid-June of '92. Clinton was in third place. Jackson was articulating a new math strategy, quote unquote, that Democrats would just look to jack up the African American vote and not lean right and try to win the race with 40%. And Bill Clinton comes in and explicitly rejects what Jackson said, explicitly rejects the new math argument in that speech, and goes on to say, in a very condescending way, you should not have honored Sister Souljah by inviting her to your conference. You're not like that. You're not filled with hate like this person is. And Jackson's standing right next to
his motives. he may have had ulterior motives for doing that, political motives, but in and of itself, that's I think, a responsible thing to say.
Well, you were exactly the kind of voter he was trying to reach out to.
Well, it did. I have bad news for him. It didn't work. But no, look, I mean, I'm trying to put on my sort of, nonpartisan hat or whatever, and just, this is where I sort of have a little bit of a problem with your overall premise, is that, so, for example, there are, so if black families are struggling in the inner cities, and I'm a Republican, pandering to them probably doesn't help me, but I still would say, I might go into the inner cities and I might say, we have black families struggling in the inner cities, we need to help them, we need to fix that. Likewise, I might say, there are, working class white Americans in places like Appalachia who feel like the American dream has left them behind. We need to help make sure. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to have protectionist trade deals, but we can't forget them. There are people who struggle. So by mentioning this group of people who happen to be white, I don't feel like that should qualify as race baiting or ginning up white resentment.
Well, I'm not.
But I feel like according to your,
I'm not saying ginning up.
I feel like according to your criteria, that would constitute this problem.
No, I'm saying there's a wink there. No,
but there wouldn't be a wink. That wouldn't be a wink. If I did it, Bill, if I did it just like I said, that's not a wink.
But when Bill Clinton goes to Jesse Jackson's conference, explicitly repudiates him for inviting a controversial figure, that is a clear signal to skeptical white voters that, hey, me, Bill Clinton, I'm not going to be under Jesse Jackson's thumb here, and I'm going to cater to your dislike of him, and not confront you about whatever racist impulses you might have that are bundled up in that.
And what I'm saying is, it's entirely possible, and in fact likely, that Bill Clinton is a shrewd political operator, will have done that based on ulterior motives. But in and of itself, what he did, the actual action does not necessarily mean that. So if you are a white politician who condemns, this statement by Sister Soldier, couldn't it just be that you're doing the right thing and that you're condemning violence and saying that it's wrong of her to sort of stoke that?
You can make the argument. I mean, I'm not casting a moral judgment here. I'm saying that there has been a strategy in the Democratic Party for a long time that it was necessary to win white working class votes, and therefore, when talking about issues of race, you are very gentle in how you approach that community, and you would not point the finger at those folks and accuse them of racism. So
I don't want to get too stuck on this. I'll just say this and then I'll shut up and we'll move on. But my take is, you may be a little cynical. I may be a little Pollyanna. I think that you're right, that there are plenty of examples of Democrats playing this game with a wink and a nod. I would just say I don't think that we can always assume that it's never sincere, that it's solely a political gambit.
I mean, I think in the case of Sister Soldier, there is documentation that from the campaign that was a very deliberate act.
Sure. I have no doubt at all that you're right about that.
And so we've gone from Bill Clinton doing the Sister Soldier moment to Hillary Clinton doing Basket of Deplorables.
Right.
And in both cases,
and don't forget Howard Dean. I
did not forget Howard Dean in my piece.
Trust. Okay.
But
you wouldn't think of it from a former. I mean, Dean, who's like a Vermont governor, to say that.
We're referring to Dean saying that, guys with Confederate flag decals on the back of the truck should be voting with us and not them because their kids need health insurance too. I mean, that's the same kind of thing. That is, after Bill Clinton did Sister Soldier, Bill Clinton, won the white working class vote by a point. The only Democrat to have done that. No one's done that since. So Gordon didn't do it, Kerry didn't do it. Oh, I mean, this was before Kerry. So Dean's like, how do we get these guys back? I'm not going to wag my finger at them and say you're a bunch of racists. I'm going to say your kids need health insurance. And I'm not going to make a big deal about the Confederate flag. And either that ended up, it started off good for him when he did it, the way he phrased it the first time. He said it a second time not as elegantly, and he got into a lot of trouble. But
how often have we seen that, Bill? How often have we seen that?
So anyway,
it's fascinating how that works.
But between Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, from Sister Soldier to Basket Deplorables, both of them cite David Duke. Bill Clinton equates Sister Soldier's comments with David Duke, and Hillary Clinton accuses David Duke of being the representation of the deplorables that Trump is cultivating. So here's, I mean, Hillary Clinton, it's overbroad to say she doesn't care about the white working class at all. She has reversed on TPP. She does have a package of aid for coal communities in her bevy of policy proposals. She's going to actively stump those communities in Ohio and Iowa and Nevada and Florida. But she makes a clear separation in that speech. There are people who are Trump supporters, who are good people, who are in economic hard times, and there are people that are racist and they're irredeemable.
Yeah, but she says about half.
That's the one word she walked back is the half.
And that's a huge word, right, because it suggests tens of millions of Americans, the vast majority of whom are not deplorable.
Well, she walked back the word
half. That is obviously the gap.
But in the walk-back statement, she says Donald Trump has taken the views of a few fringe bigots and spread them to 11 million people, referring to the size of his Twitter feed. But there's a clear implication of that many of his 11 million Twitter followers are racist or buying the message. So, she is still saying it's a sizable number, even though she's walking back to half. And I don't think she's going to go on from here continually trying to paint a broad brush, but she is clearly saying there are a faction of people in the Trump base who are irredeemable people and should be confronted. And this is a desire of the civil rights community to confront racism, confront institutional racism.
Yeah, but it's a really unforced error because remember, 3 weeks ago she gave a speech about the alt-right movement that was wildly applauded. In fact, I had a tweet that went semi-viral where I was saying Clinton's doing exactly what she needs to do. In fact, exactly what I've advised her to do, which is to surgically otherize Donald Trump and not cast aspersions on conservatives or Republicans. And she did a great job. And look, you can say you can do that. And when I say surgically, I mean you can talk about Trump and you can talk about the alt-right. It's not just Trump, but it's a small group of extremists. Yeah, go ahead and destroy them. Don't try to, paint Republican voters with that broad brush. And that's the mistake she made this time around.
Well, you can still say that it is a mistake, and we'll see soon enough. At minimum, it is a distinct shift in strategy from what every other Democrat has done, including Obama. Now, Obama proved you could win without winning the white working class. There's a bit of debate about this coming from Nate.
But you're saying even Obama pandered to the white working class in that Reverend Wright speech, which is an interesting place to do it, I guess. But let me throw this out at you though, Bill. This may, I think you're right. Now, clearly, I think Hillary has done this in the past, but in this specific 2012 race, maybe she will be the first Democratic politician that hasn't at least done a wink to sort of the white, anger base or whatever. I think this is actually indicative of a problem, which I've talked about on the show before. I won't dwell on too much here, but I think it's such it's such a problem that it deserves mention frequently. I believe the problem is that we are entering into a political paradigm where race will be the definitive predictor of where you align politically. And I think that's a real shame. I think that politics should be about philosophy and ideas, and you should have Hispanic conservatives and Hispanic liberals and African American conservatives and African American liberals. But I feel like the world is forcing us into this tribalism, that race consciousness and race, basically just racial acrimony has gotten worse, not better, in many ways. And I think this is a very unfortunate direction we're heading. And I suspect that the reason that Clinton hasn't done the wink and the nod is that she, A, thinks she can win without doing it, and B, thinks doing it would be a fool's errand anyway.
Well, I mean, this is exactly the point.
That might even turn off.
Where do the demographic numbers lie? And there's a bit of debate about this. But, according to the exit polls, Obama lost white working class, defined as whites without a college degree, by 18 points versus McCain and by 25 points versus Romney. And still won. So whereas Clinton won the white working class vote with 1 point. So a shift in the makeup of their coalitions. Furthermore, Obama had the share of the white vote declined. Obama had a higher percentage of the black vote than Clinton, although granted it was a three-way race, and more of it, a bigger size of the black vote and more monolithic in its support. And a bigger Latino vote is 5 times bigger in 2012 than it was in 1992. So now the white community, there's a big shift in the white community here, because there's a Washington Post piece by a political scientist named Michael Tesler saying, look, 50 years ago, you play a race card, you do a wedge issue, school busing, for example, law and order type rhetoric. You can drive a wedge through the Democratic Party, break off a chunk of white Democrats, and put them in the Republican camp. Or the kids 68, put them with George Wallace. And now the white community is polarized on racial issues, on partisan lines. If you're a white Democrat, you think you have completely different responses to questions about race than white Republicans. So there was another Washington Post poll about you asking voters, is Trump biased against women and minorities? And the majority of people say yes. The majority of whites say yes. The majority of college-educated whites say yes. The majority of non-college white women say yes. The only majority faction is non-college white men, and even with them, 38% of them say Trump is biased against women and minorities. So it's not that you don't want to be grossly generalistic. You don't want to say every white working class person is a racist. That is not true. But I believe Hillary is saying, I still need to get some of these voters. I still need to win Ohio and Pennsylvania and Iowa and Nevada. I can't write the whole community off. But there are some folks I am just not going to get. It's probably most of the white working class. They've been decidedly Republican for several elections. Poll shows that there is a greater proportion of folks with racist attitudes in that community than college educated. So I'm not going to bend over backwards here.
Right. But this creates a world, and I don't want to get too philosophical, but this creates a world where Republicans feel like, for lack of a better term, pandering to African Americans is pointless, so why do it? And Democrats feel like, for lack of a better word, pandering for white votes is pointless, so why do it? And so we can extrapolate from that public policy positions and political rhetoric, because politicians are concerned about winning votes that are gettable and winnable, that we would have this just greater cleavage and division along racial lines. And what bothers me about that, Bill, is I had hoped that at some point in my lifetime, and I think I've pretty much abandoned this now, I think Donald Trump is such a step in the wrong direction for this. If Marco Rubio were the nominee, or someone else, maybe the war would be different. Susana Martinez, Nikki Haley as a running mate, something like that. But I fear, I was hoping that we would get to a point where if I basically said, look, I think that welfare is a bad idea. You should at least have to work because I think it's bad for communities. I think it's bad for the person receiving. Well, just philosophically, I think it's a bad idea. Okay, so maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but that's a philosophical, intellectual argument. And there should be people of all races and ethnicities who say, yeah, I agree with that, that makes sense. And people of all races and ethnicities who say, no, I disagree with that. But we would be having a fight over an idea, over a policy idea. What happens, though, now is that everything becomes, that race becomes the lens, the prism through which every policy position is viewed. And so if I say, I think that welfare is generally a bad idea, and if you get welfare, you should have to work, that becomes some sort of a racial dog whistle. It's certainly not when I say it, but it would be perceived that way. And so that means that every political problem that we have, it breaks down almost reflexively according to what tribe you're at. If you are a white Republican, you always say X. And if you are a black Democrat, you always say Y. And that is, I just think incredibly it's unhelpful for everybody. It's not good for the white Republican. It's not good for the black Democrat. It's not good for America. And I find it really boring. Is the other secret thing, as someone who wants to write about culture and politics, I find it just very repellent and boring.
Well,
so
if you're a politician, you deal with the world as it is, not how you want it to be. And
right.
But
I dream dreams and ask why not.
Right now, the racial demographics, arguably, we'll see if obviously people are going to argue that Trump could win on a white grievance strategy if he jacks up the turnout enough. But I don't subscribe to that. But I know people are going to start making the case more and more as the polls tighten. But presuming that Trump still loses, it would seem that demographically Republicans are in a very tough spot. And if they can't see it for what it is, they're going to have a hard time. If you're just going to complain in principle that this is not the way politics should be, and you don't change, you're going to stay in that box. Trump.
Yeah, but the problem is that Republicans are trapped, and I think that the 2012 nomination was a potential crossroads where they could have gone the Rubio direction and they went the Trump direction, and now it's very much a trap. And the problem is that Democrats. So obviously it goes back to LBJ and all that, but Democrats essentially have what's it called, the first mover advantage, let's say. They have decided to double down on the votes of people who just happen to be growing in population. And so rather than competing for those votes, Republicans have said, aha, that makes you susceptible for us taking the people that you're alienating and pissing off, which is actually a defensive. Republicans are not the first movers here. They're basically taking the scraps because it's easier, and it could even work in the short term, Bill. And I'll tell you, I know you're skeptical of this. 538 has a piece out this morning as we tape this about how Trump could win the Electoral College even if he loses the popular vote. They're not predicting it, but as a plausible scenario. And the reason is that the people who really hate Donald Trump, there are millions and millions of people who really hate Donald Trump, and a lot of them are in states like California, where it doesn't matter. He's going to lose if he loses California by 1 vote or by 100 million votes, which I think would be mathematically impossible. But if he were, it really wouldn't matter. And so what matters is like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and states like that. And if he wins those by 1 vote, then you know where I'm going with this. That's the theory.
If you look at I haven't read the 538 piece yet. What I have seen in swing state polling, so forgive me if I'm missing a state here that they're flagging. White working class allegiance to Trump is buoying him in Ohio, in Iowa, in Nevada, and Florida. So you can find polls now in all those 4 states where he's either ahead by a bit or it's within margin of error. You're not seeing that in Pennsylvania yet. Maybe there'll be a poll that comes out soon that does that. But so far, Clinton's lead in Pennsylvania has been pretty solid. I've seen it no smaller than 5. And the analysis that I quote in my piece on that from the Monmouth University pollster was that the college-educated whites in the Philly suburbs are her firewall there, because Trump's doing better with the white working class, but not as well as Romney with college-educated whites. If he wins the 4 states that I mentioned, those will be flips from red to blue: Iowa, Nevada, Ohio, and Florida, and everybody else stayed the same. Trump still loses. That's to get Pennsylvania. He could win New Hampshire. If he won New Hampshire and they had those 5, it would be a tie, electoral college tie.
And I think isn't there a state where there's like a couple states where there's congressional
if he could win the Maine,
maybe
win the one vote in Maine.
Okay.
So if he took New Hampshire and the one vote in Maine, and Clinton didn't get the one vote in Omaha, Nebraska that she was gunning for that Obama got, then he'd have 270. Then he'd win. Maybe that's where 538 was going. Now,
look, but I think in Pennsylvania, I think Trump, just totally anecdotally here, but I do feel like the last several weeks he is doing. I wouldn't be surprised if he's starting to do better with college-educated whites, based on the pivot, which I'm crediting Kellyanne Conway at the Daily Caller. I've just written about this. I'm crediting her as the correlation. It seems like since she came on board as campaign manager, my guess is she's the person, the Trump whisperer, who is helping him be more disciplined and not step on. Clinton has these vulnerabilities, but he would always step on the stories and overreact or tweet some racist, retweet something crazy, or that's not happening as much now. And Clinton's, whether it's the deplorables thing, whether it's her fainting, swooning, wobbling, whatever we want to call it, spell on the 9/11 ceremony. My sense is that people like me are feeling better about Trump than we were.
You're not swing. You're a never Trump Republican. So
I've said that if the election, and I still say if the election were held today, I would not vote for either.
I think that Trump's had some base consolidation. I still see in most polling, he's not breaking 45. There's the Ohio and Florida polls where he was. In the national average, he's still not. The poll that came out today from the CBS New York Times, the two is 46-44 Clinton and 42-42 in the four-way. That to me is more indicative of where the race generally lies. Quinnipiac the other day was 5 points for Clinton. You're still not seeing Trump get nationally over 45 in the averages.
We've obviously got these.
And if he's going to win, without the popular vote majority, here's my skepticism about that. You can map it out, as I did, and as 538 did too, apparently. Now, to do that and lose the popular vote, I think you would need number one, you'd have to stay disciplined.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I think the Dr. Oz appearance does not qualify. I think going on Fox and Friends and disparaging the black pastor that he spoke to at his church yesterday does not qualify.
Well, as Dave Waggle tweeted, what are the odds that we find out that pastor is like an Iraq War veteran or a cancer survivor or something? Pretty.
Number two, I think by nature of the polls getting tighter, the media is going to start treating him much more like a traditional candidate, and the scrutiny is going to be far, far rougher. I don't think he's not going to get the Matt Lauer treatment very much going forward.
I feel like that's the one I question. I think that he's already been. It's a baked in the cake. That I think I don't think the attacks hurt him the way that they would any other, even the media coverage, the negative media coverage.
This is still a guy who is losing. He is not ahead in the big picture. You can say he's gaining ground, but he's not ahead.
Well, isn't he up like in the LA Times poll today or something? Isn't he winning?
The LA Times poll has been widely discredited. It's a very unusual methodology where they speak to the same group of voters the entire time. So it's not a fresh group, and weighted the same way. You get the same group, and the argument has been that the initial criteria for their base has been off target relative to every other poll that's out there. I mean, it's been a consistent outlier the entire time.
I do. It does seem like
look at that
in the past week or two, we are seeing the trend of Trump surging and
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a tightening. I'm not disputing that in any way, shape, or form. But I think because of that tightening, I think the media coverage is going to change considerably. And number three, to pull off a electoral college majority without the popular vote, you're going to have to gut out close races in all of these states: Iowa, Florida, Ohio, Nevada, New Hampshire, Northern Maine. Maybe he's going to make a run in Pennsylvania, seriously. To win close races, you can say ground game doesn't matter when you're up by 20 points. Ground game matters when it's an inch. And this guy has no ground game whatsoever.
Well, there is an argument that the RNC, that this has been
on the air war.
That this has been outsourced.
He's not built to win the kind of race he needs to win.
There is an argument, and I'm skeptical, but that the RNC is going to take care of the ground game. And that they'll do a good job.
That kind of bifurcated operation. Call me skeptical.
I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical, but
there's a model. I mean, there is a very deeply data-driven get out the vote model that has been honed over time, beginning with Obama, and also with AFL. Working America has their own parallel operation that's very data-driven, where it's really trying to pin down, okay, who exactly are the voters that we need, where are they, send a neighbor to that person's house so it's a familiar face, and make sure that you know exactly what gets to the poll.
But do working-class whites who are angry turn out in a way that African Americans and Hispanics who do not have Barack Obama at the top of the ticket? Instead, they have Hillary Clinton at the top of the ticket.
Well, that is an argument for the basket of deplorable strategy. If they're not going to be naturally as enthusiastic for Obama, what do you do to make them be enthusiastic? You elevate these types of issues.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come full circle on this.
Well, let's get back to your... I know we've been running a little long here, but let's go to your roll call column today. What were you saying about the media in your piece?
Let me just say, I think Twitter is the best thing that's come around if you want to prove that the media is liberally biased. And because, you know, there are no editors, you see how so many journalists like what they really think. So I have a piece that was sort of, it wasn't all Twitter, but it was, a lot of it was from Twitter. It was basically, so you have these videos of Hillary Clinton that look just horrendous. Her at this 9/11 memorial, dazed, bobbling. It was just, it's ugly. It's scary. And then of course, they say she was overheated, and you know, I don't have to relitigate like all the stuff that happened. And what I did was, and others have done this too, but you know, I've been so critical of Trump during this election. Every once in a while, like, I think I astonish. I have these newfound fans who are liberals, I think, who are like astonished and disturbed whenever I, you know, whenever I hold Clinton accountable to the same degree that I've tried to hold Trump accountable, and her team, and it just there were so many shameful and embarrassing things that people said. Like, there was a suggestion that that coverage of Clinton's health is somehow sexist, which I think's just intellectually dishonest. And Peter, the most egregious example, it was not from a journalist, but Peter Dow, who's a former Clinton advisor, who it was absurd and laughable and pathetic. I just have to be honest. And in the past, I've thought pretty highly of him, and I just think that this is what happens when you drink the Kool-Aid. That you end up saying things that are ridiculous. And so he tweeted, so after Clinton initially collapsed or swooned or whatever, fainted, whatever we're calling it, he tweeted, like, hey, it's incredibly hot in New York today. Like, I normally play a pickup game of hoops, and we had to cancel it today because it was so hot. I couldn't even go out for a stroll. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, I couldn't even go out for a stroll today because it was so hot. Well, it turns out it was probably like 78 degrees when when Clinton quote overheated. And then a few hours later, when the Clintons team, finally revealed that on Friday that she had been diagnosed with pneumonia, then he spun it like, this is actually an example of showing you how brave and courageous Hillary Clinton is, that she had pneumonia and she was still out there at the 9/11. So, come on, people. Let's be intellectually honest. Let's not carry water.
Are you mad at the media, or are you mad at Hillary surrogates?
Well, no. This piece, I think it was. I didn't write the headline, but I think it was headlined something about biased media. But I was actually covering. Look, I was covering the response. In some cases, this was by people who were ostensibly mainstream media, who I think were shilling for Clinton. But in some cases, this was like really pathetic responses from her team. Like, I'll just give you a sample of some of the things that were said, like, that apologists said. Like, oh, well, Jimmy Carter collapsed at a race. Yeah, that was after he ran 6 miles. So that's exactly like what happened when Hillary Clinton couldn't walk to her car in 78-degree weather. Or people would say, George Bush threw up on the Prime Minister of Japan, which I admit is a funny, hilarious thing that happened, but I don't think it's really relevant now.
Not to be strict, that's parallel. Those are two people with illnesses who probably should have stayed home and rested, but felt they had to power through.
Okay. But I think the purpose of this was to say, oh, this is no big deal. Like, what Hillary Clinton had, this should not be problematic at all. Well, there's a difference between running however many miles Jimmy Carter ran and the heat when he collapsed, and Hillary Clinton not being able to walk to her car in 78-degree weather. But, so then Bill Clinton had it wasn't Bill Clinton, it was the Clinton team, some anonymous person on the Clinton team, who had the thing that Hillary refuses to drink water, which of course got this whole thing dubbed Watergate, which I think is a fun and ironic way to describe this. So anyway, my point is that, like, this was me illustrating the hackery, the pathetic defenses. In some cases, these were... I'm trying to think what George Clooney... George Clooney was the throwing up on the... I document a whole bunch of ridiculous things people say. And then this actually didn't make it into my piece, but the Washington Post, Chris Cillizza, like 5 days earlier had a piece that's like, again, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was like, hey folks, it's time to quit talking about Hillary Clinton's health. There's nothing there. This clickbaity headlines that the Washington Post now uses. And then 5 days later, he's like, it's time to get serious about Hillary's health.
Well, he was acknowledging his past piece in that one. He was saying, "Look, I wrote this before.
Right.
Here's why it's no longer operative." I mean, he was not. It wasn't out of the blue.
Yeah, but we were all anybody who, and don't get me wrong, there are health conspiracy. There are crazy fringe conspiracy theories about Clinton's health, but the suggestion was that anybody who thought Hillary Clinton's health was remotely relevant or legitimate was insane and a conspiracy theorist. And now, of course, the media has been forced, after being held in a pen. The only reason we even know this happened is not because of the media, it's because some people with their smartphones captured it. And I think the only reason we even know that Clinton had pneumonia is because they had to bring it out. They were going to cover, they were going to...
So is your concern here that she is physically not fit to be president, that there's something more than just a single bout of pneumonia here? Or is your complaint a transparency complaint? When she got pneumonia, they should have informed the press immediately, and there should have been this 90-minute gap when she left the event. I mean, is that your concern, or is it both?
Well, my real concern is, number one, mockery of operatives and hacks and loyalists and Kool-Aid drinkers who defend things in ridiculous, shameless fashion. My second concern is a media where so many people, and it's very evident on Twitter, are not skeptical of politicians, but are carrying water and shilling for them. And that's the point of the piece. That's my concern.
Let's look at Cillizza. I mean, Cillizza is criticizing conspiracy nuts who are making charges without base in fact. Like that was not an illegitimate piece for him to write. There was no evidence to suggest that she was not physically fit for the office. And then when there was some video evidence of a health problem, he said, okay, this is now legitimate to talk about.
Well, there's no evidence because Hillary Clinton has held like one press conference in the past 250 days because she's been protected for the past 24 years by Secret Service. I mean, how much access does anybody have to her? And the press is being held in a pen. And then on top of it, when a Fox News reporter interviews a police officer who says that she, was stumbling and all this, that person is mocked and criticized by these people. I mean, just basically, I feel like we have many members of the media who, rather than being incredibly skeptical and curious about Hillary Clinton's health, and I think it's a completely legitimate thing for anybody running.
You're basically saying because
at the age of 69,
she does one-on-one interviews more than she does full press conferences, that validates any kind of conspiracy theorizing that you put out there because it's her fault because she's been so secretive.
No.
I mean, if you're criticizing Celiza for saying this,
I'm just saying these people are much more interested in poo-pooing questions about Hillary Clinton's health than they are in investigating.
Well,
I think we need to be skeptical.
This video, before the pneumonia, there was nothing to investigate. It was out of whole cloth.
What are you talking about? What about the coughing spell that she had?
That's not indicative of...
Bill, have I ever had a coughing fit such as that during our taping of this show and the 5 years we've been doing it?
I have had coughing fits like that where it's hard to recover when I'm trying to speak to somebody. Every human being has been in that situation.
That's why Justin Green is on call to fill in for you when these things happen. But
even Marco Rubio had to get a drink of water sometime when his throat was dry. We've all been in those moments. Okay? I don't think Celiza was wrong in that piece. Now, if you're going to say there's nothing to see here after you see a video, then that's unfair. But what I'm trying to get at here is, once the explanation of pneumonia has been made, it's been backed up by her own doctor and from outside doctors saying, hey, everything that we're seeing here does match what you would expect someone who had a walking pneumonia and wasn't properly hydrated. When the staff says, she has this issue with not drinking water properly, that doesn't strike me as being crazy talk.
Yeah, she also has a history of lying about things and covering them up. I hate to go back to this and put on my hack hat, but the whole I didn't know that the C meant classified or confidential. And then she didn't tell us the pneumonia. The only reason we know about the pneumonia diagnosis is because somebody happened to catch this on video. They were never going to tell us. Why should we now believe that when they say she has pneumonia? I think this is actually stoking paranoia. I understand why people are paranoid and are engaging in these theories when she clearly lies about things and covers things up.
If you want to argue, I think it is fair, not that I agree with it, but I think it is fair to make a transparency argument here. She didn't disclose the illness right away. I mean, I could argue that very few would, but nevertheless, you could make that case. That she abandoned her press pool to at the 9/11 event and didn't include them in what was going on until a couple hours after the fact. Now, you can say Trump doesn't even have a press pool, so she's better than he is. That doesn't necessarily excuse not keeping your press pool informed as things transpire. So if you want to make a case that you think Hillary is excessively secretive and private, and that doesn't bode well for how she would conduct governance, that's a fine case to make. Again, not that I agree with it, but I get the case. That's a different case than because she lied about X, she must be covering up some deeper illness. I mean, that's not based on anything.
No. I'm not saying she must be. We don't know. We don't know. That's a cheap attack because it's literally not based on anything. There's nothing to suggest. But it's completely beyond pneumonia. I'm just saying, we don't know what
I don't know anything about anybody.
No,
I have to rely on other people, media institutions, surrogates. I take people's word on things. President Obama could simply be a white person for all I know. Barack Obama could be an alien from Mars. I don't know. No one's proved to be otherwise.
Well, he may be a lizard. My colleagues wrote a book suggesting that he could, in fact, be a lizard. No, here's my point. Part of our responsibility as voters is to try to discern what, we go through a whole can I trust this person? Is this person fit for the job? Are they experienced enough? Right? And then clearly a major part of the responsibility of journalists is to be skeptical and to provide the public with information that politicians don't want us to know. Politicians' job is to not tell us things. The job of journalism is to, what is it? I think Orwell said that, writing is telling what, paraphrasing here, but what somebody else doesn't want printed. Otherwise, it's public relations. Well, a lot of what journalists are doing on Twitter seem more like public relations for Hillary Clinton than journalism. And what I'm saying is, I think the health of the next President of the United States is a perfectly legitimate thing. I think with Hillary Clinton, that video of her collapsing looked scary. Now, maybe it is dehydration brought on by, medicine that she was taking because of him. I don't know. But the coughing fit is also weird, and we know in the past she's had other health problems. I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to look into and to
health is legitimate to look into so long as you are fact-based and not just casting wild aspersions. So, as you have been tough on Trump, is it fair to say Trump has not been transparent at all about his health, and therefore we should be wondering what things is he hiding from us?
Well, I think yes, but I think the difference is we haven't seen any indication. If Trump collapses tomorrow, then I think that would really open the door to...
I never saw Antonin Scalia collapse anywhere until he died.
True.
Trump is an overweight 70-year-old who says he eats fast food all the time because he knows what's in it. So he could drop dead any day for all I know, based on what information I have from him, and he's not giving me any medical information from reputable doctors to prove otherwise.
No, I mean, I think that's a totally valid point. Yeah, I mean, look, Donald Trump could live another 20 or 30 years, or he could, as you noted, right? I would have thought Scalia would have. I mean, Scalia seemed to have. You want to talk about a high energy guy? A couple years ago, my wife and I were part of a pretty small group, about 20 of us, who met with him for about an hour, and just complete energy, sharp as a tack. Then I saw him in the Orioles game, sitting 2 rows in front of me. I guess in 2014. I mean, you would have clearly thought, and I'm obviously here humble bragging or whatever, but in all honesty, like, not just having seen him on TV, but having seen him in person, I would have bet you that Scalia would have made it another 25 or 30 years. He looked like he was 55. I don't even know how old he was. He looked like he was 50 years old or 52 years old or something. He was probably like 70, right? 70. I mean, so he was high energy.
It is not unusual for high energy, senior citizens to die suddenly. That is not a strange event to occur. So that's why we want more medical information than what you can see from a guy speaking in front of a stage or talking to Dr. Oz. And
we know he eats. We know his diet is horrendous. Right? All he eats are like well-done steaks and fried chicken.
For all I know, he's a secret vegan. He wants to tell us that he actually eats fast food to bond with the working people.
Who sleeps? He's a secret vegan who sleeps 10 hours a night minimum.
But I mean, if we're going to if you want to be fair here about transparency, you cannot put all the emphasis on Hillary here just because she had an episode and he didn't. That doesn't mean in and of itself that he's healthier than she is.
Yeah, but still, look, if Donald Trump had if he had a concussion, if he had the coughing, I mean, it does strike me, and that there is a qualitative difference. And now I know that some people want to talk that want to make this out to be sexism. But I think that just on the merits, we have seen visible signs of her ailing health, and we have not seen those from Donald Trump. Now, you could argue that, like, visible signs are not necessarily the most important predictor, but it is what it is.
We have a
when you have
video report from her doctor that says this is not.
We have the doctor's report from his doctor, who says he's the healthiest. He would be the healthiest man in the history of America to be the president. We have a doctor's note
and he then elaborated, saying he was comparing him to dead presidents. So that's not
true. But my point is, they both have doctor's notes saying that they're in great health. Are we going to trust those doctor's notes? Right? I don't.
Well, I got to run. What do you got to plug? Anything else you got to plug?
Check out my piece at Roll Call about the hackery and the shilling for Hillary Clinton that I've been talking about. Check out my piece at the Daily Caller about how Kellyanne Conway is the Trump whisperer.
And I also have a piece of Real Clear Politics this week. Quit whining about how long the campaign season is. Vetting is
yes.
good.
By the way, another piece. You want to talk about shilling? Somebody on Twitter, I don't remember who, but somebody I think it was a journalist. Somebody on Twitter said, of course Hillary Clinton collapsed. If the campaign didn't last 2 years, what do you expect when the campaigns last 2 years? It's going to take a toll on people. We should only have 6-week campaigns.
Yeah, that's if you had a 6-week campaign, you'd have Trump in the White House right now. So let's not do that, okay?
There you go. I agree with you, Bill. You preach it over there at Real Clear Politics, man. All right. Check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show and right back here in the nice, civil, warm DMZ next week.
Take care.